The text says their faith. He saw the faith of the 4 friends, but it could be also that the paralytic had faith too, or else he probably wouldn't have gone. So all of them had faith to go and see Jesus. All three synoptic gospels say faith of the 4 friends, but I believe that the individual himself had faith to go see the Lord. So what does Jesus say? He says, sons, your sins are forgiven you. You know, imagine the look on their faces. They're tired. You know, they broke through the roof. They're going to have to pay for that. And they come to bring their friend to be healed. And Jesus says, your sins are forgiven you. Imagine if you go to a doctor and you go in for an ailment, your arm is hurting, and the doctor says, hey, Raciel, your sins are forgiven. You know? I go from a cancer check or treatment, and they go, oh, your sins are forgiven. You know what I mean? It sounds kind of like, wait a minute, I didn't come here for that. You know, I came for healing. So why does Jesus say your sins are forgiven instead of be healed? See, this man may have been paralytic due to some personal sin or imagined sin. Many biblical scholars believe that, but we're not sure if that's true or not, because sickness is not always the result of sin. I mean, if you're going out fornicating all the time, you might get venereal disease. You know, if you're taking drugs, you may become an addict or overdose, you know, something like that. If you smoke cigarettes, you can end up getting lung cancer. So those are things that can produce things in your life. But we're not sure. We know we live in a fallen world. We know we're human beings, and sometimes things affect us. But regardless of the man's physical condition, his greatest need by far was forgiveness of sins. That was his main need, forgiveness of sins. Forgiveness was a far greater work, for it cost Christ his whole life. See? So Jesus looked beyond his physicalness, and he looked to his immediate need to be forgiven. Right? Can you be saved without being forgiven? We can't. Forgiveness is the most important thing right there. You need to be forgiven, first of all. You know, Jewish belief, they believed that all sickness was due to sin. That was the Jewish belief. They even believed that you could sin from within your mother's womb in those days. Job 4:7, we see his friends attacking him about what was going on with him. But turn over to John chapter 9, verse 1 through 3. We'll see a situation here that this man, there was something wrong with this man, but it wasn't due to sin. So we can see that not all sin produces illness. John chapter 9, verses 1 to 3. It says, now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. So why was he blind? So the works of God might be revealed in him. It wasn't due to any sin he committed, okay? But God allowed that in his life, so at the end, God would be glorified. So also keep in mind that the scribes and the Pharisees were there, and Jesus claimed the ability to forgive sin. He knew what man's greatest need was, the forgiveness of sin. This guy I read often, David Gusick, he says, what good was it if the man had 2 whole legs and walked right into hell with them? Yeah. You know, what good would that do? I'd rather stay a policy and be forgiven and know I'm going to go spend all eternity, you know, with the Lord and stuff. Warren Wiersbe gets a really good point here on forgiveness. He says forgiveness is the greatest miracle that Jesus ever performs. It meets the greatest need. It costs the greatest price, and it brings the greatest blessing and the most lasting results, because they're eternal. Right? Jesus' forgiveness. Alrighty, verse 6 and 7. And some of the scribes were sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, why does this man speak blasphemies like this? Who can forgive sins but God alone? So here we see, off the bat, we see the objectors here. These objectors here were the scribes. The word reasoning here means to bring together and to resolve in one's mind to deliberate. So, excuse me, I got really bad dry mouth right now, so some of the words are not coming out right. So they were sitting there deliberating amongst themselves within, right? Not speaking it outwardly, but inwardly. And if anyone knew the significance of Jesus' words, they did, because they were teachers of the law. You know, they were supposedly to be scholars, and they were right. By forgiving sins, Jesus was claiming what? He was claiming equality with God. See, that's what he was doing. So they didn't say a word, but in their hearts, right, they were thinking these things. So from their perspective, it was blasphemy, because only God can forgive sins. In John chapter 10, verse 33, he says, the Jews answered him, saying, for a good work we do not stone you, but for blasphemy, because you, being a man, make yourself God. So we see here now the struggle that's going to begin between these two. In verse 8, he says, but immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they reasoned thus within themselves, he said to them, why do you reason about these things in your hearts? So Jesus perceived in his spirit what they were reasoning. Perceive there means to know fully. See, Jesus knew without them speaking already what was stirring up in their hearts. And it says when? Immediately. In other words, the minute you start thinking about it, he immediately knew what you were thinking. So what did he do? He called them out. You know, why do you reason about these things? So what he did, he put them in check in front of everybody. You see, Jesus knows what's in the heart of man.
Yep.
He knows what's in the heart of man. You can't fool him.
Yep.
Can't fool him at all. You know, there's a story in 2nd chapter of John where it was a feast at Jerusalem and people were looking for Christ. But their motives were wrong. They were looking to see what they can get from him, not of who he was. And in John chapter 2, verse 25, he says, and had no need that anyone should testify of man, for he knew what was in man. So Jesus already knew what was in them before they even came to him. See? And then in Psalm 139:2, he says, you know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. So he knows what we're thinking, what's in our hearts. He knows what you're thinking right now. He knows if you're sitting and looking at him, but you're thinking of lunch. See?
Yes. Amen.
I want to get some Thai food over here. You know, he knows if you're thinking about what you're going to do later tonight. You know, he knows if you're thinking, I wish this guy would hurry up. You know? You know, so he knows all these things. He knows what you're thinking already. We can't fool him. That's why it's so important to keep our minds renewed, keep our minds pure. You know, Philippians talks about the positive things that we should think about. In Philippians 4:8, think about those things that are pure, loyal, lovely. Those are the things that we need to keep our mind focused on. Now in verse 9, it says, which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven you, or to say, arise, take up your bed, and walk? So here Jesus addresses the religious leaders with a simple question. He says, which is easier to say to the paralytic, your sins are forgiven, or to say, arise, take up your bed, and walk? In a way, forgiveness would be a lot easier, because it's not visible. There's no proof. I say, Pastor T, I forgive you for all your sins, man. No, I'm joking. You know, but there's no visible proof. So you can't say I'm lying, because you don't know. But if I heal him instantly, you can't deny that evidence. So if I can heal him, then I can probably forgive him. See? So the proof was that I can heal him. You see it visibly, because if I say, Ed, you're healed and he's not healed, then it's verifiable. See? William Barclay says, the rabbis had a saying, there's no sick man healed of his sickness until all his sins have been forgiven him. To the Jews, a sick man was a man with whom God was angry. That's in the culture in that day. That was the framework of these people. That's why it's good to dig into the culture, because when you read the verse and you know the culture, kind of, oh, now I know why they think like that. You know, I think I shared this one with you before about when Jesus would speak to the demon and it would leave him, that the Jews were amazed. Or Jesus spoke to him and he left. But in the culture in that day, the Jews, the way they would get rid of a demon, if I was demon possessed, I'm going to go find a smelly root and put it in his nose, thinking that it would chase the demon out or the smell would make him run out. So these are things that they did, or they would call on a higher power to get the demon out. But Jesus didn't do that. He just went around and spoke to it, and it would leave. And they were amazed by this. Verse 10 and 11. but that you may know that the Son of Man